My name is Catherine Rhodes, and for the film review, I chose the movie Hairspray to analyze. For the sake of personal preference, I watched the newer film that was released in 2007 and directed by Adam Shankman. Some of his other notable movies including Cheaper by the Dozen 2, Bedtime Stories, and A Walk to Remember. This movie is a romance/comedy film that's a musical that was based in the 60s. I chose to analyze this film because I'm familiar with it, and it's one of my favorite musicals. After Mamma Mia, of course. This film revolves around a 16-year-old girl, Tracy Turnbull, and her desire to dance, regardless about the taboos surrounding her weight. Of course, there are several other topics brought up throughout the course of the movie, like racial and issues with parental figures, but the plot firmly focuses on Tracy despite outside issues. I could only watch this movie on the main TV in my house, unfortunately, so I'm just going to add clips in from YouTube to make it easier to see and understand. So when I show clips, it'll just be easier to hear things. So I have a lot to say about this film, and I hope you're ready to listen. Alrighty, so when it comes to some of my first thoughts with this movie, so just when the movie is starting up, we, the audience, is greeted with a musical number called Good Morning Baltimore. I'll let you see it in a little bit.
My mind tells me no, but my feet tell me go. It's like a drummer inside my heart. So, don't make me wait one more moment for my life to start.
So Tracy presents a very bubbly, optimistic personality on her walk to the bus stop. But it's quite obvious that the other characters are not exactly as lively as she is. Despite the giddiness with her opening number, viewers can kind of get an understanding that Tracy is not as accepted as she would like to be, especially when you notice that she gets left off the bus and then catches a ride on a garbage truck. With just the opening scene, it was very easy for me to understand the course of this musical. While Tracy is seen as a happy, confident person, the way her peers reacted to her led me to believe that this was somewhat of a coming-of-age film. Another scene from the beginning of the movie that I also found important was when Tracy got detention. I believe this was a turning point for
What you looking at?
Nothing, not you.
Yeah.
So, would it be kind of like this?
You can't do that dance. Hold on now. Not bad for a white chick.
Hey, I know.
when she meets her new friends and meets people that also have not found themselves to be accepted within society. In this case, it is a racial issue when she goes. This movie is based in the 60s, so a lot of issues that some of her other friends or the other characters in this film have are based off of the fact that they are African American. And in the 60s, of course, you're definitely going to see some segregation that's still going on, despite how wrong it may be. So, like I said before, this film is a musical number. Now, an element that's within this film is diegetic and non-diegetic sounds. I learned more in depth in them in my intro to film class last semester, but basically what they are is when characters are aware or unaware that they're breaking into song and dance, or like if they're unaware, the audience is aware. It's a common technique used in films, specifically in musicals and theatrical movies. Examples of diegetic sound would be in these clips here.
A crazy bunch of kids crashed through that door, yeah. Go and throw off the coats and leave the square.
On the Corny Collins shows, characters are aware that they are singing and dancing. And other musical numbers like this one.
What?
I can hear the bells.
What are you talking about?
Well, don't you hear 'em chime?
Chimes not exactly how I'd put it.
The characters are still singing and dancing, but they are not necessarily aware. The film is based off the original film that was released in 1988. Both films are very similar. They have the same plot, the same characters, but I believe their differences were largely part of when they were released. I did notice some inaccuracies about the film, specifically how they approached the racial issues I described earlier. While there's nothing wrong with a little optimism, the musical took a very light approach to a dark subject that is segregation. I believe that this is just because of the time that it was released. Americans even now, and especially in the early 2000s, were intolerant of race issues, so it would make sense for the film to kind of glide over a sensitive topic that they just didn't want the film to focus on. Because of the lighthearted nature of the film, it had a very happy do-good theme. The theme was mostly about accepting yourself even though society may not, like I mentioned before. Tracy related to her African American peers because she understood what it was like to be judged by something that she couldn't necessarily control or didn't want to change. Throughout the course of the film, she came to understand that people will judge her and her new friends harshly, but they do not have to just accept it, and they can change the course of what they're allowed to do despite what other people want to limit them to. Alright, so throughout the course of this film, there were a couple things that resonated with me. As far as things that resonated with me morally, I would think back to the treatment of Tracy and her friends, specifically her friends that were African American. The treatment of them based off of things that they, like I said before, could not control kind of reminded me how cruel human beings really could be. I mean, for example, no matter how good the black dancers were in the show, they were never given the time to shine unless they forced it. I mean, in fact, while the film portrayed many certain characters as the good guys, I think that definition is a little too nice for them. I mean, most of these people were fine in seeing the mistreatment of their black peers and friends, even if they internally disagreed with it or it was against their own personal moral, and it took the actions of a 16-year-old girl, so a child, to get some of these adults to act. And while Tracy was also a great character, as we see first off in the film, she focuses more on herself, and I think her being able to relate to African Americans is why she pushed the situation and defended them so fiercely. And of course, I don't think that's the only reason why she defended them, but to start off, that's how I felt while watching it. But of course, as the film went on, I also think that she did make great moves to defend her friends, but I also think the film could have maybe portrayed more on her black friends' actions, on them defending themselves, because it was really their fight. And I feel like they could have made Tracy to be more of an ally than like their hero, or like the hero complex that we see sometimes in these movies, unfortunately. Alrighty, so as I wrap up my review of this film and the movie Hairspray, I wanted to point out some of my favorite scenes or characters that really made the movie Hairspray stand out to me or made it one of my personal favorites. For example, the character Edna Turnbull, who is Tracy's mom, sticks out to me in this case. Of course, while the character is constantly reminding her daughters about the struggle of being a big girl, the thing that appeals to me is that a female role is filled by a male actor, and I find that hilarious. And I just seeing John Travolta in a wig and a dress kills me every time. But what really sticks out to me is that a male actor in both the 1988 version and the 2007 version played the role of a female character. The movie, of course, is also not lacking in musical numbers, my personal favorite being The New Girl in Town, which is a scene that actually uses cross-cutting, which we talked about a little bit earlier within this course. Alright, so you can see the examples of cross-cutting in the scene from when it switches to, of course, the day show with our more white prominent characters, and it switches to our African American dancers, which is of course the night show and the Courtney Collins show, doing the same dance. And I definitely felt a sense of satisfaction when the second group of girls absolutely killed it. I mean, in all, as far as this movie goes, it did not necessarily leave me feeling like I learned some profound lesson that you normally see in some of the more serious films. While I can acknowledge that the theme's intention, or that the director's intention, was to be a classic theme of learning to love yourself despite obstacles or despite your insecurities or despite how society may view you, which is of course the film of most coming-of-age films in my opinion. The message did not necessarily resonate with me, and while I think it was a great message, it wasn't portrayed in a way that I felt it emotionally. Overall, though, I did find this to be an amazing film. Like I said before, it's one of my favorites, and I've watched it several times. It used great movie elements and musical numbers, like I mentioned before and showed. But overall, it's a feel-good movie, not necessarily one with a big message or something that's very deep for us to understand. Thank you.